Okay, thanks everyone for joining us today to the very first BC Rural Center webinar. I'm your host, Randy Morse. I'm the Communications Director for the BC Rural Center. I'm speaking to you today from the historic Langham Cultural Center in the very heart of the tiny alpine British Columbia town of Caslow. Our topic today is the arts and rural renewal, and I'm very excited to report that we're being joined by two outstanding presenters, Sarah Calhoun from White Sulphur Springs, Montana, and John Davis from Lanesboro, Minnesota. So just a couple of notes before we get rolling. First of all, remember, as I said a moment ago, this is our first kick at the webinar can. So if things do not go completely seamlessly, I hope you'll bear with us. We'll learn from any mistakes we make today and just get better. Secondly, if you, during the course of our two presenters' presentations, have any questions or comments, you'll notice at the bottom of your screens a chat bubble. Simply click on that and you can send your questions to me. And at the end of our two presenters' presentations, we'll go over your questions and see if our two guests can answer them. I'll do my best as well to take care of any tech glitches that might arise. So if you do have any technology problems, please use, again, the chat function, type in your issue, and I'll do my best to help you resolve it during the course of our webinar. But speaking of the webinar, we're going to provide a recording of today's webinar. It should be available by the end of the week. It's going to be posted on our website at www.bcruralcenter, and center is spelled the Canadian way, CENTRE.org, and will also be pushed out on social media. If you would like to have more information about that recording, just drop us a line at info@bcruralcenter.org. Okay, with no further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker today, John Davis. John moved to the small Minnesota town of New York Mills from Minnesota back in 1987 because that's where the $10,000 he'd managed to scrape together at that time would buy him a piece of land. He says that people there didn't see me as an agent for change. They saw me as a guy who was really good at painting farm buildings and homes. They came to like John, he came to like them, and life in a small town. He soon noticed that his new neighbors seemed to be hankering for a bit of culture. So he began to ask himself the question, how can we weave the arts into this community so tightly that it's hard to remove it? Within 3 years, he had founded an artist residency in his home, established a nonprofit in an abandoned building downtown, started the Great American Think-Off, which is a very successful television program John might mention during his comments coming up. And under his leadership, the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center received $35,000 from the New York Mills City Council. Remember, this is a tiny little town. He says that that would be the equivalent if it had been in Minneapolis, of Minneapolis City Council donating almost $14 million for a cultural initiative. That investment paid off handsomely. Today, prospering New York Mills has an economy dominated by the arts and culture. John is, he would blush if he were saying this himself, so I'm going to say it, is both an artist and a visionary, as well as an eminently practical Midwesterner. He's proved to be brand savvy, he's marketing shrewd, he's budget conscious, that's an unusual combination, I'm sure you'll all agree, and very persuasive in promoting rural communities. Small cities and towns are turning to him for advice across the United States on how to reap benefits, especially economic benefits, from their unique cultural and historical assets. John is currently the executive director of Lanesboro Arts in tiny Lanesboro, Minnesota. I'm very pleased to welcome John Davis to today's webinar. John?
Thanks you so much, Randy, and thank you to the BC Rural Center as well. I'm going to start out here. Just as a little bit of background, thanks for sharing my story as well, Randy. I went to college. I went to art college in Minneapolis, at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Studied both design and fine arts. I think one of the most impactful classes, though, was in creative problem solving. That really sparked my mind to think about problems as opportunities and not to use money as an excuse to achieving results. So after I graduated from college, I started a house painting business, became an entrepreneur, saved up $10,000 and was in search of a small town. And eventually the small town found me. That's the only place I could afford to buy a farm for $10,000. And I was able to find my dream house. So this was my farm in New York Mills. It needed a little bit of work, actually a lot of work. It had no doors, windows, plumbing, or electricity, but other than that, it was good to go. I ran out of money 3 different times working on it. To make ends meet, I would paint barns, paint houses, garages, and I got to know my neighbors and people in the community. So, as Randy said, they didn't view me as a change agent or as an artist. They just viewed me as someone who was willing to work hard, get dirty, and climb up 40 feet to paint the top of a barn. And just in having conversations with community members, I really realized that there was a thirst for the arts. There just wasn't access, and I didn't think that was fair. So I would have friends come and help me renovate this farmhouse, and they would make comments like, you should really do something with the arts or involve the community. And I wasn't quite sure what that was going to look like until a friend of mine gave me this toy plastic tractor. And believe it or not, things just kind of came together and gelled. And I thought, I'll form a nonprofit arts organization. It'll be a residency program. Mission's going to be to provide innovative access to the arts. This tractor will be a logo, and it'll symbolize cultivating the arts. And the goal, pretty simple, just become a national model for rural arts and economic development. Piece of cake. So when I first proposed that idea and formed a board of directors, I think people thought I was a little ambitious, but why not dream big? So the whole idea of a residency program was to give artists from the city a chance to find their voice in a small town and get away, recharge their batteries, but that small town could learn from those artists as well, creating a win-win situation. So the community would benefit from an artist, the artist would benefit for time in the country and getting to be really a celebrity in a small town. My philosophy is pretty simple and straightforward. In a town of 1,000 people, the audience really needs to be everyone. And so when you're thinking that way, how do you create access to the arts? Think that the audience is everyone, and make sure that the programs that you create are designed to gain that buy-in of the community as well. Make it relevant. How do you make art relevant in people's lives? So after 3 years, the farmhouse was successfully renovated along with the barn. And our very first artist in residence noticed me looking at a building on Main Street. And it was an abandoned building. And she said, maybe you could turn this into some kind of a art center. And I had heard that the owner was looking to possibly donate it to the city, but it was in such bad shape. Literally, bricks were falling off the back of the building. The second floor of the building had a 10-foot ceiling, but it was in such bad shape from water damage that you could actually touch the ceiling and it sagged that much. So the owner just wanted to try to get rid of it, but no one in town would take it, including the city. And so I approached him about a donation with a little twist. I wanted the owners to contribute financially to the project as well to create this cultural center. And the idea would be, this was the the first brick building on Main Street in New York Mills, and it was falling apart. So if this history could be preserved, it could be a spark of a renaissance in New York Mills. So after about 6 months of negotiations, the owner pleaded with me not to negotiate anymore and ended up donating $12,000 to the project. So we actually got paid $12,000 to accept this building. As Randy had said, the city contributed $35,000, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's the equivalent of Minneapolis giving over $12 million to a project. Needed a lot of work and repairs, including renovating, gutting the entire building, putting on a new roof, and completely remodeling the building up to historic standards. Now, as a condition of the city giving money to this project, the economic developer at the time was very skeptical. The project was completed on time and under budget. I served as a general contractor, hired all local contractors. So even some of the naysayers in town, we hired them. And they ended up working on the building and became believers in the project. And because of a very skeptical economic developer, there was a baseline of community survey that went into economic data the year before the cultural center opened. The survey went out and they asked residents if they thought it was a good idea for the city to give money to the project. And overwhelmingly, 67% of respondents said no, it was a bad idea for the city to give money. But a year after the center opened, that number flipped completely to 68% of people thinking it would be a good idea. The other thing about that baseline was that it had a starting point for how many jobs and businesses were in the community, and that would track out 5 years later. So this is the restored facade of the Regional Cultural Center, which hosts a gallery and performing arts space. The upstairs is classroom space. So it hosts exhibits, musical performances, poetry readings, and community engagement activities for kids. And one of the very first classes, a very important 6-year-old girl took her very first art class at the Cultural Center. And I'll get back to her later in the presentation. This is the ribbon cutting with the very relieved mayor of New York Mills. And to my right is Jim Buchan. He moved back to New York Mills when he read about this arts project in his hometown, decided to move back to New York Mills. He had just retired. His job was press secretary to the Surgeon General, C. Everett Koop in Washington, D.C. He moved back to New York Mills to help with this project. I learned a lot about PR and marketing from Jim Buchan, who really knew how to utilize the media and the press to tell a story. So how do you create access to the arts in a prairie community surrounded by lakes? And how do you get fishermen involved? I have a fish decoy exhibit. So one of our very first exhibits, we invited fish decoy carvers to do an exhibit. And it was amazing. We had over 50 regional fish decoy carvers, say that 3 times fast, fish decoy carvers. And we sold almost half of the work right off of the walls from the gallery exhibit. Integrating arts into the community was also really important. Welcome signs to New York Mills we had made by elementary school students. The tractor symbolizing cultivating the arts went up on the water tower. I like to say that only took 5 years to be somebody else's idea. Instead of a fast food place, the city commissioned a sculpture park as you're coming right into town. And that's the world's largest art tractor that we commissioned a farmer who, previous to being an artist, he just woke up one day and decided he was going to be a sculptor and decided to make big things out of metal. He had welded grain elevators his whole life and woke up one day and made a big giant coffee cup and decided he was a sculptor. So we commissioned him to do this work. Access to the arts, why not access to philosophy? Created a program called the Great American Think-Off, which posed a philosophical question each year, which it still does, such as, is the nature of humankind good or evil? And we'd invite 4 participants to debate that question in New York Mills, and the audience could vote on the winner. It was televised for 4 years live on C-SPAN, and we used C-SPAN and media coverage to help tell the story of New York Mills, that it was an up-and-coming community and successful and creative, to help draw attention to the community so more businesses would be interested in starting in New York Mills. Yeah, the philosophy is simple. Weave the arts into the fabric of the community and get community buy-in. So some of the ripples of the City Council of New York Mills giving money to a project 45 miles away, the city of Fergus Falls, 2 years later gave over $100,000 for the Center for the Arts. After that, the city of St. Cloud gave over $500,000 to a Paramount Theater. And the city of Bloomington gave over $1 million to the Bloomington Arts Center in a civic plaza that also included their city hall and police department. So civic governments in Minnesota started thinking differently about how they gave money to the arts. They viewed it more as economic development. So did this work? Did it have an economic impact? In New York Mills, after 5 years, 17 is the number of new businesses that opened or relocated to New York Mills, increasing jobs 40%. You're saying, well, what about 20 years later? Did it really have an impact? What about the population? The myth is all rural towns are dying. What about New York Mills? The 1990 census, New York Mills population was 972. The 2010 census, the population increased over 27%. One, can the arts make a difference in one person's life? The answer is yes. In New York Mills, that 6-year-old girl who had her very first art class in New York Mills went on to enjoy a lot of different artist residencies, grew up with the arts, moved away from New York Mills, got a job in corporate America and Target, decided to move back to New York Mills, and is now the executive director of the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. Then I heard about another community in Minnesota, Lanesboro, even smaller. So I decided to move there in 2000, population 754. And one of the things that attracted me to the community was that they were interested in building a new art center. So I thought this would be really cool. Plus, there's a river that goes through it, and I love fishing. So I thought this is going to be a win-win scenario. It's a beautiful community. It's got a 2-block long main street surrounded by bluffs, and there's a bike trail through it, a lot of historic houses. There's a dam and a river. There's a problem with the dam, though. It's starting to fail. It's an 1868 dam, only one of 5 like it left in the United States, and is in need of desperate repairs. And I'll talk about that more a little bit later. The one challenge, though, of moving to Lanesboro and wanting to work on this art center was that it was a traditional art center, and all arts activities were going to be in one building. So there was an existing theater company in town, and they're proposing the gallery and the theater move into one building. And I realized that I had just spent 13 years working in New York Mills on the exact opposite of this. So, the existing vision was move everything to one building. There's nothing wrong with that. It's traditional. It's limited access. And there's no promotion of walkability for the community. But with the new vision, what if the whole town becomes an art center or an arts campus? It could be a new model, promotes access and promotes walkability. So I proposed this idea to our board of directors and the theater's board of directors and the community. And the result was unanimous. I was there 6 months, proposed this idea, and completely rejected. Even my own board of directors said, no, I think it'd be better if we just put everything in one building. So what do? We decided just to move forward, but to do it a little bit differently, be creative, cultivate partnerships, develop shared visions and goals, weave the arts into the fabric of the community, and reimagine. So our biggest partner is with the city itself. We've worked with the city to build an appreciation for the arts, secured components of the arts campus. They provided in-kind programming. The signs you see were actually created by a local artist who grew up in Lanesboro, moved away to get his Master's of Fine Arts, and now is a public artist who has art installations all over the country. He was commissioned after a town hall meeting that identified signage as one of the needs for the city. So he created custom signs that are all over the downtown that direct people to various spots in town. And the business, the Iron Horse Outfitters, was one of our new businesses that moved to Lanesboro. They actually used their logo to complement existing signage that was created by this artist. Discover, Sculpture, Explore Lanesboro. This was another partnership with the city. We also partnered with the school, the town historian, and the historical museum to create public art that would be medallions that would represent different parts of the community. So this was the nature medallion. We had one on education, one on nature, one on history, and we worked with the city and community members to strategically locate these medallions all over the community, including smaller ones, so that people could discover the history and culture of Lanesboro and discover public art. We put a map that goes along with it, so there's a walking tour so people can literally discover sculpture and explore Lanesboro. One of the most successful exhibits we've done to help strengthen the community and to break down barriers of who is the artist and who's the gallery. We partnered with the Lanesboro Sales Barn, which is a livestock auction in the community, one of our biggest employers other than the school. We had photographers do basically a photography exhibit. It was a day in the life of the sales barn. Our sponsor was the Minnesota Beef Council and the Fillmore County Cattlemen Association. We grilled out steaks in front of the gallery that were grilled out by volunteers from the Cattlemen's Association. We had over 300 people attend the exhibit. We couldn't fit everyone in the building. There was overflow onto the street. The local pub next door donated a keg of beer. And it was a fantastic exhibit. But to me, one of the most memorable experiences from that was the owner of the sales barn came into the gallery and bought his very first piece of artwork. So part of integrating the arts into the community is also weaving the arts into planning documents. So I worked with the chamber and the city to make sure that the arts were an important part of planning documents as the community moved forward. And going into 2007, 2008, the documents for planning for Lanesboro were updated. And in 2008, the Great Recession hit as well. And someone in the community said, well, what about this arts campus idea? And I said, I think that's something that we should really start looking into again. And so we decided to start a $1 million capital campaign on the heels of the Great Recession to look at what if the entire community could be the arts campus. And so many of the projects and initiatives were already in place for this idea. The tagline for it was just simply building a new vision for the arts. So what does an arts campus look like? Well, we didn't know. So we wanted to ask people in the community what they thought it could look like and to reimagine how the arts could improve the quality of life, to promote walkability. So we didn't just ask people for money when we were raising money for a capital campaign. We wanted their ideas and input. From that, we came up with a vision plan for possibilities for arts and creativity to be interwoven throughout the community. In addition to vision plans, something very practical was so that when we did our historic renovations of the buildings that we were undertaking, why do it for these two buildings? We wanted to leverage funding to get design guidelines for the entire downtown. And we helped with getting this initiative underway so that downtown preservation guidelines could be developed. And as soon as they were developed, they were utilized. Our local grocery store went out of business several years ago and was left vacant. You can see the vinyl siding there. It was actually 3 buildings at one point. And so part of these design guidelines would reimagine what that could look like repurposed. And because these drawings existed, a local business person, an entrepreneur, decided, you know what, I'm just going to buy the whole lot of those, and this is what it looks like today. There's an art gallery, there's a quilt shop, And there's a pool hall with a second art gallery in the middle. So just by having an example of what something can look like repurposed inspired people to take action in the community. So Arts Campus components are simply buildings that house the arts, walkways that connect them, and arts and public spaces. The initiatives we raised money for were the St. Main Theater, which is now an artist residency center, our building, which we used funds to restore the facade and create office space upstairs. An unlikely part of our arts campus was the city parking lot. Tourists who would visit Lanesboro would want to park in a 2-block radius downtown, and it upset business owners because people would park there all day and no one would park in the parking lot 2 blocks away. So we thought, what if we could use the arts to drive people to park there? What if the parking lot was an arts destination? So we turned it into a poetry parking lot. So we have haiku created by local and regional national artists that were installed in the parking lot to attract more attention and to make it easier for people to park there. And these are the finished haikus. We went through a design process that had community input so that the poems that were created looked like they were a part of the historic signs and the historic lighting that was already there. The same with the welcome kiosk. Lanesboro didn't have a welcome kiosk or an info kiosk, so now when you park, you can also find out more information about the community from the information kiosk. But getting from the parking lot to the downtown still required a walking bridge, and so the historic walking bridge, we helped raise money with the community to do a bonding issue to restore the historic walking bridge that then connected the parking lot to the downtown. We worked with the History Museum to create signage, and this is the finished version of the Coffee Street walking bridge that now connects the downtown to the poetry parking lot. A lot of what we do also revolves around engaging young people. We have a partnership with a couple of different regional universities that are 35 to 40 miles away. We believe in working with young people and integrating our staff into community projects every year. The Arts Campus has received recognition from all over the country. In 2003, Lanesboro was named one of the top 12 small town art places in America. We received funding from the National Endowment for the Arts. In 2014, we received a Bush Prize for Community Innovation. And in 2014, we successfully completed a $1 million capital campaign for the Lanesboro Arts Campus. $130,000, that's the dollar amount of gallery sales our gallery has every year. $30,000, that's the number of audience members we engage every year with our programming. 300 is the number of artists we serve every year. 150, the number of volunteers our organization works with every year. In September of 2014, the city of Lanesboro passed a proclamation designating the entire town as an arts campus. They're actually the first small town in America to make such a proclamation, which gets us to the year after. Well, with all that work, did it really make a difference from an economic standpoint in the community? It certainly had a lot of impact. 10. In 2015, in the summer, the Chamber of Commerce had a ribbon cutting for not one, but 10 new businesses that opened in the community on Main Street. So the ribbon cutting was actually, they closed off the Main Street, which is also a highway, to have the media there and a ribbon cutting for 10 businesses. 2.5 million dollars went into just historic renovations in the downtown area during the Arts Campus initiative, which gets us to last year, 2016. At the beginning of the story, I talked about the community challenge of the dam. Water is really not supposed to be going through it like that. It's in danger of failing. We've tried for years to get money from our local legislators and through the legislature, but it always seemed to stall. So I thought, was there any way the arts or an art exhibit could leverage funding for this dam that needed over $3 million worth of work? So we partnered with the Smithsonian on a water exhibit to raise awareness of water, but also to get support from our local legislators who might not support the dam on itself, but they did support the Smithsonian exhibit. So we got letters of support for the dam through the Smithsonian exhibit. We also had a local exhibit as well of artists reimagining and reinterpreting historic photos in the community. We had over 12 different partnerships for the Smithsonian project. Our organization was also one of 6 in the country to receive funding for a youth access project where 3 different students were able to film stories about Lanesboro that went on the Smithsonian Museum on Main Street website, gathering even more national attention for Lanesboro and water and the community. And the films can still be seen on the Smithsonian Stories from the Main Street website. These students had never done a film before. They had never done an interview before, and it was the first time they'd ever done a project like this before. And now the Smithsonian actually changed their guidelines because they were going to be 2-minute films. They changed their guidelines so that films up to 15 to 20 minutes could be put on their website. Which gets us to this year. Can the arts or an art exhibit really impact public infrastructure in a community? The answer is yes. We didn't get $3.2 million for the dam. In May of this year, Lanesboro actually got $4 million for the historic renovation of the Lanesboro Dam, which also helps provide power for the community. And I really believe the arts have the power to strengthen communities and sustain communities. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, John. That was terrific, inspirational stuff. I love the idea of turning a small community in its entirety into an arts campus. Okay, so John, we're just going to take away your video for the moment to improve our bandwidth situation. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our second presenter, Sarah Calhoun. Sarah was raised on a farm in rural Connecticut. She was inspired to move to Montana by Ivan Doig's This House of Sky. So literally, it was culture, in Sarah's case, that changed her life. From her home in the small town of White Sulphur Springs, she's become an inspiration to entrepreneurs and music lovers across North America and is known for her dedication to supporting rural communities. Sarah's hard work has brought her recognition, among others, as the 2012 National Women in Business Champion for the U.S. Small Business Administration. And in 2011, she was invited by President Obama to attend a White House Forum on Jobs and Economic Development after serving as a delegate to the APEC Women in Business Summit back in the day in San Francisco. Closer to home, she was named 2011 Entrepreneur of the Year for the state of Montana. She and her company have been featured in many publications, including Entrepreneur, National Geographic, and Sunset magazines. The founder of the Red Ants Pants Foundation, Sarah should get an award for best names, if nothing else. Sarah took the lead in creating and now directs the Red Ants Pants Music Festival, which attracts, I think we're inching up toward the 15 or 20,000 patron mark, to a pasture on the outskirts of tiny White Sulphur Springs every year. It's my great pleasure to introduce Sarah Calhoun. Sarah?
Thank you so much, Randy, and I appreciate you having me here. And well done, John. It's always exciting to hear your story again. I was lucky enough to meet both these gentlemen this summer up in Kelowna, BC, at a conference we got to speak at together. And it's so exciting to see all the other stories and successes that are happening across North America, really, with arts in small towns. So I'm just going to share a little bit about my history with getting into starting a pants company, first of all. Like Randy said, I grew up in rural Connecticut on a farm. And as many of you know, women are shaped very differently than men in that we have curves. And the only thing on the market at that time was men's pants, work pants for men. So women, ever since the gold rush, truly have had to wear men's pants when they want to get serious work done. So after college, studying environmental science, I spent about 5 years working in the backcountry and instructing for Outward Bound and leading trail crews, and just getting generally fed up with not having any pants that fit my curves. So I talked to some other companies about it, and I wanted them to start a line of workwear. No one really jumped at the idea. One guy finally said, if you're serious about it, maybe you should start your own company. Little did I know how hard this would be. So first thing I needed was a name, right? Turns out that in an ant colony, it is the female ants that do all of the work. And this is a true story. The male ants simply breed and die. So at that point, I got my name. And in 2004, I moved to Bozeman, Montana. I had never even been to Montana, actually. It just seemed like the kind of place that I wanted to live. And the first weekend there, I didn't even know what a business plan was at this point. So I went and got a copy of Small Business for Dummies. Great read if you ever want to start a company. And I was reading this book at a coffee shop my first weekend, literally, in Montana. And a guy noticed the book and we got to talking. And it turns out for the past 20 years, he had done production and design for a little company called Patagonia. A very fateful day, certainly, back in '04. He took me to a shop a week later and gave me loads of contacts and advice. And he just said, Sarah, I think you're onto something big here. I think you need to move on this now. And Richard Siberel continues to be one of my top mentors, and he's on my board of advisors to this day. So I had my work cut out for me. I had no experience in the apparel industry or knowing how to start a business. So the first 2 years, I engrossed myself in learning everything I needed to know about product design, development, pattern making, business, marketing, finance, sales, all of that stuff. I really had a lot to learn, and I still do, and I'm still making plenty of mistakes along the way. I got a job sewing backpacks to learn production on the floor down in Bozeman, which was great to learn the technical details. I established financing, developed a website, marketing strategies. And after about a year in Bozeman, it actually was too big of a town for me, and I wanted to be in a rural agricultural town. And that's when I read Ivan Doig's book, This House of Sky, which is his memoir about growing up on a ranch here in White Sulphur Springs. And it seemed like the kind of place I really wanted to live. I came to visit one time, found an old saddle shop, a historic building built in 1880 that was for sale on Main Street. So I borrowed some money, dove in, and then finally opened the doors to the first ever company dedicated to making workwear for women. And the women cheered all over the place. So there were 3 things that I promised myself when I started this company. The first one is, if I cannot run a business with integrity, then I do not deserve to be in business. Nobody does. The second one is, if I can't run a clothing company and keep all of our production on US soil, then I don't want to be in business. And the third one is, if I can't make it personal and have fun connecting with my customers, then I don't want to be in business. On paper, I'm somewhat of an unlikely candidate to be an entrepreneur. But with a strong work ethic, a good sense of right versus wrong, and just knowing how to treat people well, it's not that difficult to run a business with integrity. So we contract with a mother-daughter owned facility in Seattle, and every single one of our products at Red Ants Pants are made in the USA, and that will never change. That's a really important value to us. I think for many reasons, obviously creating jobs locally and high quality and excellent working conditions, but also the craftsmanship of doing things and making things ourselves here and building pride in manufacturing in America. I think that's something we need to work a lot on right now. And perhaps it can help unify us in ways that we might need to these days. So at this point, I've got a company, a product, a storefront. I decided our business model on direct sales. So we don't sell wholesale through retailers. We just sell directly to our customers, one pair at a time. And we do this through our storefront here in White Sulphur Springs, our international headquarters, if you will, as well as online, redancepants.com. And we sell about 60% of our sales online, and it's been incredible to see how much volume of traffic we've brought to town here just for folks to come do destination trips to buy pants. But without having our products in other workwear stores across the country, we really had our work cut out for us to build the brand and the name of Red Ants Pants so people know that it's a product to find. So the way we did this was tour de pants. So this is one of my tour reps and I, Maggie, and the old Airstream trailer that we used to pack our pants around the US and Canada for weeks and weeks on end. We did this for a series of probably over 3 or 4 years and did different regional tours. We had a beer sponsor, Big Sky Brewing out of Missoula, which was fantastic. And this just allowed us to go into people's homes and their farms and their barns and their communities and get to know our customers face to face and to hear their stories. And that was a really important piece of this whole project, was to understand it. The really neat part about this too is understanding that these pants are starting to mean something more than just a pair of pants. And that's fascinating to me, that you can somehow weave value into a product. We received from a letter from a customer who she told us that she wore her pants into surgery because she felt stronger wearing her Red Ants pants. That just blows my mind fully. We got another story of a biologist who was working backcountry in the Grand Canyon, and she was 7 miles back, and a rattlesnake struck her leg, and one of the fangs got through only the top layer of the canvas on her Red Ants pants. So we like to think that we're Red Ants pants, saving lives. So that's kind of the first chapter, all about the pants. Now I want to tell you a little bit more about the broader community and how the place where I chose to live and work has influenced my story. This is the more personal side. And as I'm learning, the fundamental meaning of all of this is coming down to the human connection. So as you know, I moved to White Sulphur because of Ivan Doig. And this little town, White Sulphur Springs, it's a classic, authentic ranching town. Population 900, and it's about 100 miles from any other city in Montana. It's centrally located. We like to say it's in the middle of everywhere instead of the middle of nowhere. Doig inspired me in a really beautiful way. I'm going to read a quick quote for you just so you can understand this place. This is from This House of Sky. It is not known just when in the 1860s the first white pioneers trickled into our area of south central Montana, into what would come to be called the Smith River Valley. But if the earliest of them wagoned in on a day when the warm sage smell met the nose, and the clear air lensed close the details of peaks 2 days' ride from there, what a glimpse into glory it must have seemed. A glimpse into glory indeed. And continued from Doig. Whatever the prospects might seem in a dreamy look around, these settlers were trying a slab of lofty country, which often would be too cold and dry for their crops, too open to a killing winter for their cattle and sheep. It might take a bad winter or a late and rainless spring to bring out this fact, and the valley people did their best to live with calamity whenever it descended. But over time, the altitude, the valley floor sits over a mile high, and the climate added up pitilessly. And even after a generation or so of trying the valley, a settling family might take account and find that the most plentiful things around them were sagebrush and wind. As we know, Montana holds much romanticism and cachet, and for good reason. But truth be told, this landscape is equally as tough as it is majestic, as harsh as it is visually stunning. And Doig didn't breeze over that. He told the truth. Sagebrush and wind. I knew then that I wanted to live there. I wanted to know these ranchers and the descendants of these settlers. I wanted authentic Montana, and I sure got it. Doig told stories of the Stockman Bar and the bullet holes that can still be found within. Bullets from the wild days that weren't all that long ago. I'm not sure what about this exactly appealed to me. I think perhaps the wildness, the fact that White Sulphur felt and still does feel somehow more old-fashioned than most places. But perhaps it was because it felt as though anything were possible. It struck me as the kind of a town where no one would tell you what to do or what not to do. So I renovated this old brick saddle shop, which you can see behind me here. I have 2 apartments upstairs for rentals, and I live right behind the shop here. So it was a great spot for for economics. As you can imagine, real estate is tremendously affordable in a little town like this, as John was mentioning. Our money goes a long way in rural spots. There's a lot of potential there. But one of the best parts about my shop that I purchased was that it is only 17 steps from my front door to the Stockman Bar. So I had found my place, finally. The first winter I was here, I had only wood heat until like 2 years ago, actually, it's been that way. And I had chimney fires and frozen pipes. I had one of my tenants bring bar fights home, and another shot himself in the leg with a pistol while upstairs. My first Chamber of Commerce meeting in 2005, The Economist had just released a report naming Marr County as the lowest income of any county in the entire nation. I remember my only comment at that meeting was, "You guys, it's only up from here." So a good friend of mine told me I should write a book on how to move into a rural community. As you can imagine, a girl from the East, which is kind of a bad word out here, it's a little bit difficult getting accepted into this classic cowboy culture out here. And I was lonely moving to a small town. I didn't know anyone. I didn't know what the heck I was doing trying to start this company, right? So I did the only thing I could. I pitched in. I volunteered as an EMT on the ambulance. I coached volleyball, joined the chamber, joined the Arts Council. I got to know the people. I helped out at brandings and cattle drives. And slowly, these folks started to understand who I am and why I'm here, and they slowly started to accept me. I love that in small towns and rural areas, living here, it forces you to find commonalities with people that you otherwise wouldn't. We need each other. And it makes our character a lot richer. As Randy mentioned, in 2011, I was named Entrepreneur of the Year by our governor. In 2012, named by the SBA as the National Woman in Business Champion. Incredible honors, but they didn't ring home until I returned from the White House. And the meaning of this didn't sink in until I went to the Stockman Bar. I went for a burger. There was a shipping party going on where there were folks were shipping cows, so the place was packed with ranchers. And unbeknownst to me, the local paper had written up a story of my going to DC. And there must have been a dozen different ranchers that night that came up to me, slapped me on the back, and simply said, "Sarah, you've made us proud." So after about 5 years in business, I realized it was time to bring people together on a larger scale. A lot of the values and lessons we had learned on Tour de Pants about the people and again, this human connection were really starting to ring true. And we're here in this beautiful remote spot in central Montana. And it was time to throw a party, a big party. In July of 2011, in the cow pasture just outside of town, 6,000 fans came to the first annual Red Ants Pants Music Festival. This tripled the county's population. We literally bought out toilet paper across the 3 counties surrounding us. It was by far the riskiest move of my life. I was working off a $0 budget, hoping that we could sell enough advance tickets and that people would come. And very fortunately, it worked, and it took the entire community to pull it off. Ranchers lent their land, augers, mowers, even helicopters. High school groups earn money picking rocks and filling in gopher holes. The football team collects the trash. The county supports us with watering the roads, and the city with fire, EMS, and law enforcement. We had a core crew of staff and hundreds of volunteers, but we really had no idea what to expect. But it was like a field of dreams. I remember that first year we looked up, the campground gate was closed, and there was a line of cars and trucks and campers and sheep wagons just going miles and miles down the valley. We built it, and they sure came. But the best part about the festival is that it brings people together. You give them a good beer, good music, and an incredible landscape, and they cannot help but to connect. One of my favorite pictures is of 2 men at the festival. Their backs to the camera. They don't appear to know each other well. They're both just having a beer and enjoying the show. And one guy, on the back of his shirt, it reads, "Save the Planet." And the other guy, who must have worked for an asphalt company, his shirt read, "Pave the Planet." But to me, that's progress, and that's what it's all about. So one of the things that does set our festival apart from other music events is what we call our demonstration area. And this is an important part of our mission here. So we do all these demos of traditional ag and work skills like ranch roping, crosscut sawing. Here you can see the competition. We do, this year we did trailer backing and knife throwing as well, which was very well attended. And one of our most popular ones is meat cutting. So this consists of a hind quarter of a beef hanging off of a tractor and a local butcher cutting off the steaks, heading them over to a top chef who throws them on the grill, and people get to taste the beef, right? So you can see why it's popular. But the first year we did this demo, the butcher went to cut off a big chunk and it slipped and just hit the dirt. So he did what he should have, picked it up, trimmed it off, and carried on. And it was overheard in the crowd, some guy saying, "Man, this is awesome. The only place you can find this is Montana or Mexico." Nothing wrong with that. We must be doing something right. So perhaps the most important element of this festival is that it is our major program and our only fundraiser for the Red Ants Pants Foundation. So this is the nonprofit branch of this whole enterprise. It's a 501c3, and our mission is in support of women's leadership, working family farms and ranches, and rural communities. So all the things that we get really excited about here. Our values include cultivating a strong work ethic, encouraging self-reliance, especially for women, maintaining traditional work skills, and my personal favorite, providing opportunities for people with different perspectives to connect, build bridges, and discover common ground. Especially important these days. So at the end of this year, at our 7-year total, we will have awarded over $100,000 in grants to individuals and programs across the state who have projects that parallel our mission. We also hold a timber skills course every fall, which consists of 4 days of chainsaw and carpentry training for women. It's every September here, and we invite you to check it out, redantspantsfoundation.org. And we're currently developing a women's leadership program, Montana high school girls, which we're very excited about. So this past summer, we had 17,000 people attend our 7th annual festival for 4 days of festivities. Our headliners over the years have included greats like Merle Haggard, Emmylou Harris, Mary Chapin Carpenter, Taj Mahal, Charlie Pride, Lyle Lovett, a lot of great acts. And it's always the last weekend in July of every year. So we invite you to come check it out as well. So the economic development piece isn't something I didn't really intend to be involved with all of this, but certainly it has been a factor kind of by circumstance. And our governor's office and Department of Commerce did an economic impact study back in 2013, and this was just for the impact of the festival weekend. And they predicted that up to $2.8 million were going to change hands just that weekend. And again, that was 5 years ago, and that does not include the secondary and tertiary effects year-round in our community, which is pretty exciting. So I can't say for sure that our economy has improved, but I can say that we now have a new brewery, a new bakery, a new gear store. We have new streets and sidewalks all up and down Main Street. We have new carriage lanterns. We have a new Marr County quilt trail that's just getting set up right now. We also have a new school that just opened last week, and our new library just got fully funded, which is pretty darn exciting for this little town. And I am proud to say we are no longer the county with the lowest income in the nation. So that is what I got for you now. Let's see, I'll just skip to this one here. And I think we're good, Randy. I think we got a little time for questions.
Okay, Sarah, thanks so much. Let's just see if we can call up John here as well. Just bear with me for a moment. John, where did you go? John, if you can hear me, do you have the possibility of unmuting your device? There we go.
Yes.
Terrific. What about video? Any possibility of cranking that up? It's not essential. We already know how incredibly handsome you are, but well, here we go. I think I can help you with that. Wait a minute here. Okay, so while we wait for John to click on, here's a question for you, Sarah. What is the financial relationship, if any, between your Red Ants Pants business and the Red Ants Pants Music Festival?
Great question, and really there is none. We put a lot of effort into really keeping our lines clean between the for-profit and the nonprofit. Obviously, there's a lot of IRS regulations that we have to do so. We can always pass through with the pants company donating product or services or staff hours or utilities or whatnot to the foundation to house them anything we need, but we can't go the other way. So that's a one-way ticket for sure. Obviously, there's a lot of co-branding with the name and the logo. So that's really the only, and my involvement working for both entities is the shared commonalities there, but really no financial pass through.
Okay, thank you. John, what advice might you have for other arts organizational leaders in small, remote, rural towns like New York Mills and Lanesboro, based on your experience? Any nuggets of wisdom?
Well, I think one of the commonalities of Sarah's story and mine are, really listening and getting to know the community, volunteering. I spent 3 years not doing anything to do with arts, with the community. I volunteered, at the Finnish History Museum. I volunteered at the, senior center, and got to know people in the community that way. So I think if you haven't already done that part, that's, I think, a really, really important part of building community is actively being a part of that community. I think the other thing that I think is also true, it's I think the easiest work in the world is dividing people. The much harder work is bringing people together and finding commonality. And so when we can do that as an arts leader, finding commonality, whether it's with the agricultural community or the farming community or business community, there's so much that we have in common that Sarah has pointed out too, in a state like Montana, in Minnesota, or across the country. I think the challenge is finding those commonalities and looking at what those could be and exploring people's potential and a community's potential through a positive lens.
Okay, thanks. This is for both of you. I don't know if you recall, I certainly do quite vividly, that when we met in Kelowna this past June, one of the things that we talked about with some excitement was the possibility of actually reaching out to one another's respective communities and seeing if we couldn't get some kind of mutual project or projects going that would allow folks in White Sulphur Springs to share their experiences and their place with folks in Lanesboro, and perhaps even in a place like Caslow or New Denver or Malakwa here in British Columbia. I'm embarrassed to say that we haven't followed up on that up here yet. Have either of you given that possibility any thought? And the bigger strategic context, quite apart from our specific small towns, is just the notion that there are so many wonderful things happening in small places like White Sulphur Springs and Lanesboro that go unnoticed by the vast majority of folks in our respective countries. In strength, perhaps lies, in numbers rather, perhaps lies strength. Any comments, maybe starting with you, John, and then Sarah?
Well, I think it's a great idea. I think that's something perhaps even for a second webinar. I've got a few ideas that I might want to talk with folks about, after this presentation on exactly that topic. But I do think that one of the challenges of living in, as Sarah said, the middle of everywhere, is sometimes you're feeling that isolation, and just knowing that there are other communities doing amazing work, other arts leaders or community leaders that happen to be working in the arts, has that larger sense of commonality as well. So I think it's a good idea. I think it's also something that's really needed, that wouldn't just happen through like an art place or a major foundation gathering or so forth. But I think having forums to share those success stories and things that don't work as well are really important, especially to young people moving to communities or existing community leaders who are looking to, reimagine what their community could be like, or to find those commonalities. I think it's a great idea.
Sarah?
Absolutely. And I actually first met John in Iowa City last fall at a placemaking summit, a rural placemaking summit. And we were both speaking there, and I literally had to look up what placemaking was on the plane on the way to the gig, because I hadn't heard of it, and I didn't know that this kind of thing was happening in other places. I had my white sulfur blinders on, and it really opened my eyes to walk into a room and see 250 people from all across North America doing awesome projects in other places. And I really think there's value in all of our stories being shared, whether that's a podcast or this sort of thing that goes on. I know there's someone on this call named Sean Newton, who's a brilliant filmmaker here in Montana, that he and I have been chatting about getting something started with, perhaps a rural institute here in White Sulphur. So we'll keep the wheels turning and see what we can all do, because there's certainly strength in our togetherness.
Okay, great. Well, speaking of the gig in Iowa City, this topic reminds me of the work of a guy named Zachary Mannheimer. Mm-hmm. Who does most of his work in Iowa, and we've actually republished a really fascinating list that Zach published last year, listing the 13 things that his experience and research has indicated small remote towns need to pay attention to if they're going to have any hope of retaining their young people, let alone attracting young people from cities to their towns. And I think it's apropos to list the top 5. Never mind the bottom 8. Number 5 on the list is distilleries and microbreweries. So let's just do a check. White Sulphur Springs, check mark. And Lanesboro, check mark. Correct?
Check.
Okay. Number 4 on the list are restaurants and bars. Are we doing okay there so far? Yeah?
Lots of watering holes.
Okay.
Yep.
Number 3 on the list is an entrepreneurial spirit. And I don't even need to ask you guys if you've got that going on, because you both personify the fact that both your towns have got a fair dollop of that. Number 2 on the list is high-speed internet. How are we doing there? Sarah? Yes?
Excellent. We have some of the fastest internet in the state. It's broadband and fiber optic cable out to every single landowner. It's phenomenal. Better than Bozeman and Billings.
Wow. John?
Working on it. A lot of local politics involved, state politics, but we're scheduled for community-wide reaching out into, agricultural areas of Lanesboro in 2018 for broadband.
Okay, and number 1 on the list with a bullet is, drum roll please, wait for it, a lively cultural scene. The number 1 reason that young people give for contemplating moving from a big city to a small town like Lanesboro or White Sulphur Springs. So unless we have any other questions, I'd like to thank our presenters today, John Davis, Executive Director of Lanesboro Arts in Lanesboro, Minnesota, and Sarah Calhoun, the founder of Red Ants Pants, the founder of the Red Ants Pants Foundation, and the director of the Red Ants Pants Music Festival in beautiful downtown White Sulphur Springs, Montana, for joining us today. For all of us here at the BC Rural Center, and certainly from our communications center here in the historic Langham Cultural Center in beautiful downtown Caslow, British Columbia, and on behalf of our executive director, Gordon Borgstrom, I'd like to thank all of our participants for joining us. This is our first kick at the webinar can. It will not be the last. Be sure to visit our website at www.bcruralcenter.org, sign up for our e-newsletter, and we will keep you posted as to when and on what topic our next webinar is going to occur, and keep your eyes peeled as well for the recording of today's webinar. So thanks everyone for joining us. Have a terrific day. This is Randy Moore signing off. Bye, you guys.
Bye.